Well, first of all, Emily, I just want to say how interesting it's been to travel across Asia as a private citizen. I came here a lot as a diplomat at the White House and at the State Department. You see and meet and hear different things. I will say, just to underscore, that in truth, the Trump administration has factions when it comes to China. You've got hardliners that are worried about the military threat. You have others that believe that we have to take a very hard line economically. And then there are others that, frankly, prefer engagement and believe that some form of economic diplomacy is absolutely essential at this time. I think that latter group, probably led by the Treasury Secretary right now for this moment, is in ascendance. And you hear the language slightly less threatening, indicating that there is a preference for dialogue at this moment. I think that's appropriate, but at the same time, I will say I think the hallmark to date of the Trump administration is a degree of erratic behavior. It trends from one moment to the next. There's uncertainty about how to play. I think the hard thing for businesses and for markets is to know how to plan in an environment where things are changing so much.
I want to ask about China. We heard some comments from President Xi Jinping. He doesn't seem to be in such a rush to, of course, come out and speak more boldly. But what needs to happen for a summit to take place between President Trump and President Xi?
Emily, it's a great question. And frankly, I was in the midst of a lot of that diplomacy over the course of the last many years. One of the things that Chinese interlocutors insist upon is a degree of preparation and planning in front of the meeting. So when President Xi met President Biden, it would be hard to describe how much time we spent in advance basically planning every single thing, how many steps people would walk, who would reach their hands out first in the greeting, who would raise particular issues in a discussion. And I think the Chinese, in this moment of uncertainty, really are insisting on some planning in advance. I think what we've heard so far from the Trump administration is that President Trump just wants to go right into meetings. But there are a variety of reasons why that is anxiety producing for Chinese friends. One is that just uncertainty about what the outcomes could be, and it could, you could find yourself straying into other issues in which the Chinese team was not prepared for. But I think the most important thing is the Chinese team is always concerned about Xi Jinping's face. And he cannot be in a situation where President Trump might say or do something that would cause him political problems, either at home or around Asia. And that's real. And so I think right now our biggest challenge is that the two countries are exchanging public broadsides through the media, through CNBC. There is not as much private dialogue or discussion. And frankly, private interlocutors are not being as effective either on the business side or former diplomats. And so what's going to be essential, I think, is some lines of communication, discreet, careful, behind the scenes to start between the two sides. It's been difficult for both Beijing and Washington to climb down for a variety of reasons. But if they don't, we're going to be heading into a very difficult time, and a time that I'm not sure, I won't speak for China. I can tell you the United States is not prepared for. You've talked about, whether tariffs will be 50, 165. It does not matter. Fundamentally, we're going to be facing shortages in critical areas. Magnets, medicines, go down the list. We do not have appropriate stockpiles. We are not prepared for the economic disruption that will follow. And so I would say this, at this juncture, what's best for the United States is to, in fact, take those steps to reestablish dialogue, really consequential dialogue, see a high-level engagement between the two sides, and then back off from this economic precipice, which is not good for either of our countries and not good for the global economy.
During the China Development Forum, there was a meeting between Senator Steve Daines and that of Premier Li Qiang. Given what all has happened since then, does that not count as kind of a step towards a potential summit?
The truth is, I applaud what Senator Daines attempted to do. He was really not given a mandate by the Trump team, but he basically said, look, I want to go, try to establish discussion. Other large and influential business people around President Trump have similarly tried to establish lines of discussion. The Chinese are actually careful now, and they're not sure which high-level people actually represent the administration. They treated Senator Daines very well, and I think the Chinese sent an appropriate message about they were prepared to sit down and get started. But we've not seen follow-up from senior people in the administration. I think what we're seeing, though, is Treasury Secretary Bessent positioning himself bureaucratically within this very complex Game of Thrones environment around the president to be the key person that will engage with China in the next little while. But again, the Trump administration is so unpredictable that we don't know whether, in fact, he will be tapped by the president, whether the president will insist that, we go right to high-level discussions between President Xi and President Trump. I do not think the Chinese are going to be prepared for that. Remember, in the first term, it was Xi Jinping who came to Mar-a-Lago early to meet with President Trump with very little preparation. But the situation is different now. And so I don't think China's going to be prepared to really expose President Xi to high-level diplomacy with President Trump without appropriate preparation. And in truth, that's the right way to do business and diplomacy. And I will say that I noted the comments that President Xi made during the visit of Azerbaijani leaders to Beijing. The messaging that he is using is actually quite resonant across Asia. There is a sense that right now China is being the mature, careful interlocutor. And the fact is, I do think the United States has to back off from this overheated rhetoric and, frankly, erratic policymaking, which is not good for the United States. I've come from Northeast Asia. This is not only creating anxieties in Beijing, probably in Hong Kong as well, but frankly in our allies and partners' capitals. Behind closed doors, along corridors of power, people are anxious. They do not know what to expect from the United States right now. That's not in our strategic interests.
What do you make of the move where China reassigned their trade negotiator? He was an envoy to the WTO, Li Chenggang. How significant is that?
Hard to tell at this time. The truth is we focus more right now, Emily, on all the people inside the Trump administration that are being reassigned or fired or shown the door. The truth is there are a lot of changes in personnel in Beijing as well. Senior people in the military, some people in the central bank. You've seen some moving chairs. It's hard to know, is this an issue of performance? Is it an issue of simply wanting a different look, a different approach? Or is it another example of alleged corruption? We'll know more subsequently. I will say senior bureaucrats in Beijing, I worked with a lot of them, they're nervous too sometimes. They're uncertain occasionally about what to expect from their own careers.
We've seen President Trump take an active role in the trade negotiations with Japan. So far, nothing has come of that. We're also tracking J.D. Vance and his visit to India. Semi-informal. He brought his whole family, of course, his wife with the Indian background. What do you make of these moves in terms of the Trump administration and their foreign policy?
Yeah. So, Emily, just for your viewers, just to understand how unusual this is, normally a trade negotiation, particularly a complex one that involves not just tariffs, but other structural impediments. Remember, across Asia, many of the things that have blunted American exports to China are not, or to Asia, are not formal tariff barriers. There are other structural impediments, and those are complex, challenging negotiations, often that take years. What the Trump administration has launched is a series of dozens of bilateral engagements, negotiations. Sometimes those negotiations start and they have 1 or 2 hours of exchanges in which you're able to put your position on the table, but really not go into great detail. I think the jury is still out about how significant these talks will be and what they will yield. I will tell you that many countries, Japan, South Korea, India, probably Indonesia, across Asia, desperately want to move beyond this period of uncertainty and hopefully come to some sort of deal. But I will tell you the terms that Trump and his team have put on the table on auto imports and auto parts make it difficult for some of these countries. Japan, South Korea, they want to continue substantial amounts of investment and technology in the United States. They're interested in imports of natural gas. And frankly, they're prepared to explore some exciting new arenas of cooperation like shipbuilding. But these are not things that can be accomplished on the fly. They take time. And I think one of the challenges is that President Trump has occasionally signaled a degree of impatience in these negotiations. I don't need to tell you, Emily, in Asia, when you are transmitting that you want to get things done very, very quickly, that can be quite challenging. And so I think it's too early to say whether any of these negotiations will come to really substantial fruition. If I had to guess, we'll see a few interim deals that will be long on rhetoric but short on details. Probably Japan and South Korea might be first. Even a country like South Korea that's coming into a very complex presidential election, they have a lot to offer. Over the last 4 or 5 years, largest investor in technology in the United States, serious defense spending. It's possible that you'll see some movement that will signal, at least in our allied relations, that we're prepared to climb down a little bit from this tariff cliff.
What about Taiwan? This is an economy that you have not mentioned yet.
Yeah.
Trump has threatened 100% tariffs on its semiconductors. How does Taiwan stand in this trade war?
You know, I would, Emily, it's a great question. It's probably the most delicate and challenging question. The key here for Taiwan not only poses some economic challenges, it has a substantial deficit with the United States, but provides probably the key ingredient in the global economy and with respect to really the most sophisticated semiconductors. But at the same time, there's a security component here. The United States really over decades since the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act has stood by as the guarantor of peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. There occasionally are voices and statements out of the Trump administration that make people question, is that still significant? My own view is that there is strong bipartisan support to ensure that peace and stability. And ultimately, the relationship between the United States and Taiwan, and frankly, the world, is so important with respect to technology that this has to be handled carefully.
Dr. Campbell, it's really great to have you here in Hong Kong on your first trip to Asia, of course, being in the city here. And you were credited with Washington's pivot to Asia. With what you're seeing now happen in the world with the Trump administration, where does the pivot to Asia stand?
Yeah. Emily, great question, something that I sometimes stay up late thinking about. I'm a person who believes over decades that American purpose, American determination, America's future lies here in the Indo-Pacific, and that the lion's share of the history of this century will be written here, and that the United States historically and now more than ever has to step up. I will tell you in a bipartisan sense, there have been challenges to make that a reality, to bring that dream to fruition. And that's because of preoccupation elsewhere. You've noted that the Trump administration has been very focused on Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East and domestic politics. I will just simply say this is a region that demands the full attention of the United States. I was proud of much of what was accomplished during the Biden administration in the Indo-Pacific, the Quad, trilateral engagement between the United States, Japan, and South Korea, a variety of other initiatives. But at the same time, it's still not enough. We need to do much more to signal that we are a predictable, reliable, key player in the Indo-Pacific, not just strategically and militarily, but economically and commercially. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to come to Hong Kong, to get a sense. I'll be meeting with our Chamber of Commerce here. I want to hear from them directly about what the challenges, opportunities, and risks are going forward.